All right, this is Mr. Gillum, and today we're going to start talking about positive and negative numbers. All right, we're also going to be talking about how to find a number's opposite. When we talk about positive and negative numbers, I like to kind of relate that to more than just math. So, for instance, there is positive and negative. There's also yin and a yang, a good and an evil, a proton, electron, a matter, an antimatter, and each of those is known as opposites. Okay, and that's going to be an important math word as well. Okay, opposites. So, and this doesn't just apply to math and algebra and things like that. It applies to everything in the entire world. Everything has an opposite. The first instance of opposites is probably you're going to see in your history class, okay? And when your history teacher is referring to a year, often they will have to say AD 1000 or 1000 BC, right? Because there's actually two 1000s. Right? There's a 1000 over here somewhere on the right and 1000 over here somewhere on the left. And to know which 1000 you're talking about, you use AD for the one after and BC for the one before. And so you know which 1000 you're talking about. That's kind of the same way in numbers. There's two 5s, a positive 5 and a negative 5. And they're in opposite parts on the number line. They're opposite sides. All right. Another time you might think about positive and negative numbers would be sea level. Okay. If you're above sea level, that's usually referred to as a positive value. Okay. When you're above, it's positive. If you're below sea level, we think of that as being a negative amount. Okay. So up and positive and down and negative. Above positive, below negative. That type of thing. Okay. Or maybe some of you had these thermometers outside. I remember when I was growing up, I had a big thermometer and it said, the degrees, and there was two sets of numbers. One was in Celsius, one was in Fahrenheit. And I always thought it was really interesting when I had to have school and I saw that the temperature was negative. Well, thermometer might be one of the best examples when looking at opposite temperatures. Now, if I said it's 30 degrees out, that's cold, but that's not near as cold as if I say it's negative 30 degrees out. Look at how many 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Negative 30 is actually 60 degrees less than 30. All right. But when I say negative, it means I'm that much lower. It means below zero. Okay. Less than zero. So a thermometer is also another good way to talk about positive and negative numbers. Okay, it's even less than zero would be a negative number. So let's take a look here. Opposite numbers are just the same number with an opposite sign. Okay, and the two really important things, especially when we start graphing coordinates and things like that, is to remember that to the right, the numbers get bigger, and to the left, numbers get smaller. So even though negative 4 and negative 1, if we were comparing them, because negative 4 is farther below 0, it's actually less than negative 1, even though the number 4 is bigger than the number 1. Negative 4 is less than negative 1. So when you start thinking about negative numbers, you think about the inequality being the opposite direction. All right, same way with the vertical number line. The more the numbers go up, the bigger the number gets. The more the numbers go down, the smaller the number gets. Okay, so again, when I look at this, if I'm looking at negative 3 and negative 1, negative 3 is actually smaller than negative 1 because it's farther below 0. It's farther away from the positive numbers. So you think of everything as being the opposite direction once you get those negative numbers in there. So regardless of whatever number it is, it could be a decimal or a fraction or a whole number, anything. Every number has an opposite. 0 is its own opposite. Zero is its own opposite. Okay. So basically, if I say what is the opposite of 3, you would say -3, or 5, you'd say -5, or 3.1, -3.1. And then the same way with the negative numbers. If it was -3.1, its opposite would be +3.1. So there's a positive and a negative value for every number out there. And we call those opposites when they have everything the same except for the sign. Okay. So I have all these numbers on here and it looks like a ton of things to do. However, all I want you to do is just tell me what the opposite of each number is. And so this won't take any time at all. So when I look at 3, I know that 3 is positive. Whenever I know sometimes it's confusing when you look at these numbers because some of them have signs in the front and some of them don't. The sign in front of the number is always going to tell you whether that value is positive or negative. And if there is no sign, we just assume that it's positive. So I know this 3 is a positive 3. I know its opposite would be -3. I see this 5 doesn't have a sign in front of it, so it must be positive. So its opposite would be -5. Positive 12, -12. -4, on the other hand, is already negative, so its opposite would be +4. The opposite of -1 would be +1, and the opposite of -6 would be +6. So if you don't see the pattern yet, all I'm doing is if there is no negative sign, I'm putting a negative sign. If there is a negative sign, I'm removing it. Okay, those are called opposite numbers. Okay, they're exactly on the opposite side of the number line from one another. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If that's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's -5. And you can see exactly how far away those numbers are. 5 to 0 and 5 more down to 5, that's 10. There's a distance of 10 in between those numbers. Okay, and between -5 and -1, there'd only be a distance of 6. That's why -5 is less than -1. All right, it's below 0 farther. It's lower. Okay, so 1/2. It works the same way with fractions. 1/2. Since there's no sign in front of it, I assume that it's positive. I know its opposite would be negative. 3 1/3. -3 1/3. 2 1/5, -2 1/5. They're opposites, okay? And then the same way again, let's go to the next part here. We have -6 1/3. Its opposite would be +6 1/3. -5 5/6, +5 5/6, okay? I think you get the idea. If it's negative, you change it to a positive, and that would be its opposite value. 1.2, -1.2. 6.3, -6.3. 7.8, its opposite would be -7.8. And finally, the last column here, these values are starting as negatives. Their opposites would be the positive value. 9.1, 3.8, and 1.2. So hopefully you're starting to associate positive and negative numbers with, say, a timeline, or above sea level, below sea level, or the temperatures on a thermometer. And also you can identify all numbers' opposite values. That's it for today.